not bow down.
Let my people go.
We will not bow down.
Let my people go.
We will not bow down.
Let my people go.
We will not bow down.
Let my people go.
We will not bow down.
Let my people go.
Hello and welcome to episode 39 of the Croydon Constitutionalist podcast, bringing classical liberalism to South London and beyond via our YouTube channel and wherever you get your podcasts. My name is Dan Heaton and my partner in podcasting today is Mike Swaddling, the co-founder of the Croydon Constitutionalists. Mike, how you doing?
Yeah, good, Dan. Moving on with this brave new world, and Parliament's disrupted, so they seem to be doing at least a little bit less damage to us than normal.
Splendid, very, very good to hear. And I'm delighted to say that we're also joined today by Josh L Ascough, a Libertarian Party member and a regular contributor to our website. Josh, how you doing?
I'm doing good, thank you. Trying to survive in the current heat, so hopefully I'll get through fine.
Excellent. It's a little bit cooler today as we record this, which I'm definitely grateful for. Well, Mike, what have we got to discuss today?
So today we're talking about COVID, the northern lockdown, some of the polling that's been done with the people in Britain, the second wave or possible second wave, and Spanish holidays. We're talking about the war on obesity, the LibDem mayoral candidate for London. Yes, they had one. Brexit and the potential Japan trade deal, and some peerage announcements. And also, of course, our interview with Josh.
Well, yes, COVID. We thought we were coming out the other end, as it were, but there's been a little bit drawing back on that. Some of the easing of the lockdown that had been planned has been delayed, so I'm afraid you'll have to wait a little bit longer to go to the bowling alley. And indeed, there's been an extension of the compulsory nature of face masks. You would now need to wear a face mask were you to be the sort of person that goes to a museum or a gallery, or perhaps more likely a cinema. And just hot off the press almost, there's been a tightening of the lockdown in certain parts of the north, in Greater Manchester and parts of West Yorkshire. I'm not entirely understanding exactly what those things are, but my understanding is you're allowed to go to a pub, but only with people from your own household or something of that nature. It's a bit confusing, really. And people who went on holiday to Spain, including Grant Shapps, who I understand is currently the Secretary of State for Transport or something like that, has got stuck in Spain because basically, if you come back from Spain, you now have to endure a 14-day quarantine due to an uptick in some cases in Spain. Mike, you planning on a trip to the Iberian Peninsula?
Obviously not now. I mean, I could have been at one point, and it certainly looks like an option to get away, and you can't blame people given the year we've had for doing that. I think the government is overreacting generally on lockdown. I think the direction of travel is completely wrong, and there's a whole host of issues around that. But in terms of that particular call they made, and the same with the northern lockdown, you've got to make it very quickly and announce it with effectively immediate effect. You can't say, like the fast with masks, in 10 days from now, it's going to be so dangerous you're going to have to wear a mask, even though in 10 days from now, there's going to be less people with COVID, less transmission, etc., etc. You can't say, we think it's really bad in Spain, but all you lot have got 10 days to come back, spread around as much as possible, and then we're enforced a lockdown. They've got to do it pretty sharp. And the fact that it's caught out a government minister is the right thing, really.
So, Josh, what do you make of the latest developments in the lockdown?
Well, in all honesty, I suppose you could say maybe a naive optimism, hoping that the government would learn its lesson from previously locking down the entire country and almost destroying the economy. But that was clearly, I suppose you could say, self-denial of how incompetent the government can actually be. Because, locking down the entire country, the problem is, especially when it comes to, the government classifying certain people as essential workers and non-essential workers, is the fact that, all jobs are essential for every single worker. And so making it so that certain parts of the north have to go back into lockdown is seriously damaging households' ability to support themselves. And we have the example of Sweden, where they didn't go into a full lockdown, and they have started to see their cases decline. But I mean, one place that's never actually mentioned is South Korea, how they managed to bring out testing kits much sooner than any other country, and they started to see a rapid decline. I think it was in late March, early April. And so we have examples that lockdown is not the way to go, and yet the government is just showing that either it is pure incompetence of deciding to go back to the same thing that didn't work and is actually very damaging, or it's just a massive power trip, and it just seems like the easiest option for them because it's much easier than thinking.
Yeah, and it's interesting because the lockdown does still seem to be quite popular when you look at polling. And there's some interesting polling that's come out just recently, which suggests that the UK public believe that up to 7% of the population have died already of COVID, despite the fact that's more than 100 times the actual figure. If you look at the recorded deaths from COVID, and we've discussed previously some of the issues with the recorded COVID deaths. And apparently also they seem to believe that 22% of the population has had COVID, which is sort of really, it's more like 5 or 6%. And they're definitely fearful of a second wave. So perhaps that's why people aren't so worried about the things that are going on in Greater Manchester now in terms of the reintroducing certain restrictions. Mike, why do you think this is the case, and is the media to blame?
Well, there's definitely a lot of hysteria around this. People's ability to assess risk generally is bad, and we've known that for a long time. It seems to be particularly bad around this, and people that are sort of standing next to each other for a long period, thinking that the face mask is going to make any difference, makes me laugh. People that see this as a particular threat whilst driving around at great speed, make me laugh. People who are getting on an aircraft and travelling off to different countries, going in swimming pools, it's a genuinely sort of statistically quite a dangerous thing going in a swimming pool, but are worried about this disease this virus, just have no ability to assess risk. They're not understanding the differences. And the government haven't helped. So let's be honest, you're being told to sort of eat out and help out, and you're being told to get back to work if you can. But if you listen to a radio show, I don't really watch the TV, but public announcements in train stations and that are constantly telling you what a danger it is. And it shouldn't be a surprise that people have kind of fallen for that. Just quickly on the second wave, and this is something people are particularly fearful of, and the government mentions every opportunity this risk of a second wave. We are seeing second waves around areas. Now, arguably, some of them are actually first waves. They just didn't get hit much the first time. But we're not seeing an increase in the death count. And that's surely the thing that matters. And clearly, if you get people very ill, you don't want that either. We're not really seeing much increase in hospitalisation either. If people are guessing it, but they're going about their daily lives, what are we worried about? What's the issue? If it's causing hospitalisation and deaths, absolutely. But they're locking down, which, as Josh has pointed out, isn't very effective. But they're locking it down for something that allows people to just get on without knowing it.
Well, exactly. Who actually knows what percentage of the population have had it and been either symptomless or with very, very mild symptoms, because they, of course, haven't been tested. You couldn't really have that test regime here that some other countries perhaps do have. So I think, Josh, you mentioned earlier South Korea. Of course, South Korea has a number of advantages over us in this respect, is that it has the experience, and if you can call it an advantage, but it has a previous experience of the sort of SARS outbreak some 15 or 20 years ago now, so that they know how these things work. They're a different culture perhaps as well, which means that they're more used to doing these things. And perhaps as well, they're a little bit more or less trusting of what comes out of China, perhaps. So they're a bit more suspicious. But yeah, it's bit of a confusing situation at the moment. So, Josh, will you be eating out to help out this coming week?
Oh, that was a ridiculous policy to come out. It's essentially trying to bribe the public into eating out in restaurants. When if people don't want to eat out in restaurants, they're not going to, no matter how much you try and bribe them into doing it. Because I found it much more comfortable. I suppose I could say that's the one benefit to the lockdown, if you could even call it a benefit, is the fact that I've been ordering a lot more food to the house. So it's not only been helping food delivery industries. I've also found it a lot more convenient as well, because it's more affordable. It's more intimate. I get to watch or do or whatever I want in my own home with while I'm eating my food. So just throwing money at people in an attempt to say, come on, try and help this industry. I get the idea behind that. It's the idea of going, the restaurants industries have been falling down very hard because of the lockdown, so we need to try and help them up. I get the idea behind it, but it would have made a lot more sense entirely if there was just never a lockdown, and if the government had said, okay, the private companies, the restaurants, they can decide for themselves whether they're going to require you to wear a mask, whether they think that they can social distance, and if the public are extremely fearful of this virus, then they will be incentivized to not go to those industries. If they value the services that the restaurant gives over the potential risk of the virus, then they will go to the restaurants. So I mean, this entire process, like with the lockdown and with the eat out schemes, it seems like taking 5 steps backwards, 2 steps forwards, 1 step to the left, 4 steps backwards, and then 1 step forward again.
There's a thing here, and we've said it before. If you want people to get back to a normal, you have to let them get back to a normal, rather than incentivizing them to go to a restaurant. Actually, just let them go to the restaurant and tell them they can go out. Maybe they can take in a restaurant after they've been around the gallery without wearing a mask. When you impose the mask wearing on things, you immediately send the message that it's not safe to go out. Anyone with any sort of brain can work out that if it's unsafe to walk around the museum without a mask, it's not safe to sit in the restaurant and eat without a mask. Or actually, maybe both are safe, which is what I think. But the government just sending these range of mixed messages and frankly indebting us by subsidising the restaurant industry that they've caused to be in a bad state in the first place.
Well, Mike, you mentioned mixed messages, which takes us on nicely to our next topic, the war on obesity. So the government now wants us to eat out to help out. But this is on the back of something we discussed previously, which is the proposal to introduce for junk food adverts. Well, the government is now talking about banning buy one, get one free offers. Mike, why don't you tell us what you think about that?
I'm a huge fan of the idea of banning and controlling every aspect of our life that they now seem to be getting into. Clearly, we are children. We're not responsible enough to live our own lives, and we need to be told by the government what we can and can't do. I mean, sorry, it's a farce, isn't it? What are they playing at? I thought the Marxists lost in the election in December last year. I was wrong. It turns out they were both Marxists running, and that does sound somewhat hyperbolic. But Boris, what's going on? Boris has had a moment of a big health shock, and he's choosing to change his diet. Fantastic. If he wants to eulogise to us about it, I'd rather he didn't. But fine, not a problem. At the point he intends to start changing laws, it really is an infringement on our liberty and the liberty of people who are trading, in the case of the buy one, get one free offers, the people who are advertising with the infringements on the advertising industry. And it's just a not very effective thing. We're not children, we're actually his boss. It's our country, not his country. He works for us, and he really should get an idea around that. But you know, there's one more thing with it. Sorry, just at the moment, the economy is tanked. We know that it's being kept artificially going because of furlough and some of the private pumping of money that they're doing. But at some point, there'll be a day of reckoning. To get businesses up and running, you've got to get obstacles out of their way, not keep putting obstacles in their way. And it's wrong from a liberty perspective, and it's wrong from an economic perspective. The two areas I thought we voted against in December.
Josh, I think I probably know the answer, but what's the Libertarian Party perspective on this? The banning of bog offs.
Well, I suppose the short answer would be the party. I suppose the response to Johnson deciding that he now wants to be a nanny to the entire country would be Johnson. What the f? You were meant to be running on the idea of dismantling the nanny state, and now you're actually for it. And the banning of fast food adverts before, I think it was set for 9 p.m. That one just made me laugh, because I think to myself, yes, because obese people, they go to bed early. I just thought, yes, I mean, I often wonder what went through the mind of politicians when they came up with this idea of, okay, we need to try and curb childhood obesity and try to help obese people. What's the best thing we could do? Well, we could ban adverts for fast food at 9 p.m. because all obese people go to bed very, very early. So if they can't see it, they won't get obese. I honestly swear that is the logic behind it. And the idea of banning buy one, get one free, the problem with this is not only as we said that it is the infringement on our liberty because it is an infringement on our freedom of choice. Also, the problem is the majority of people who benefit from buy one get one free offers are people who are poor or are on benefits, and so it allows them to have an additional surplus of the good that they are looking to consume, so that the way they can actually afford to sustain themselves. By banning buy one get one free, you're actually hurting a lot of poor people.
Yes, it is the nanny state writ large, isn't it? Now then, the Liberal Democrats, remember them? They used to be big about 10 years ago. Well, there's some news about the upcoming mayoral race. The Lib Dem mayoral candidate has stepped down. The candidate, Siobhan Benita, has withdrawn from the race. In a social media video, she announced that she cannot commit to campaigning for a further year because of the delay in the mayoral race caused by the COVID crisis. An interesting character. She stood last time as an independent when she was, her selling point was she was the only candidate at the time who was in favour of a third runway at Heathrow. But when she decided to join the Lib Dems, she decided that, of course, she was then against a third runway at Heathrow. So the Lib Dems have no leader at present, and now they've got no London mayoral candidate. Mike, what's the future for the Lib Dems?
Well, we've discussed this before. I don't see the purpose of the party, to be brutally honest. They used to be liberal. They used to be the party against ID cards and in favour of free speech and, not economically liberal, but liberal in terms of a whole range of other policies. They used to be democratic. They were the party in favour of PR. The liberal side, they have none of those credentials anymore whatsoever. The democratic, their PR is really on the back burner. We had a referendum. There's very little popularity for electoral change here, whether it's right or not. And of course, they're the anti-Brexit party. On a human level, I do feel sorry for her. I can understand that, she's probably taking time off work or balancing a career and running as a candidate. Very hard to do. It's a very high profile position being a candidate for Mayor of London. So you'll have the spotlight on you, and to fill that for a whole year when you know you're not going to win is really hard. On the other side, she's an anti-democracy candidate, couldn't care less. Serves her right.
Yes, so Josh, obviously the Liberal Party no longer really exists in terms of this formation as the Liberal Democrats. The Libertarians perhaps looking to take on some of that mantle. What's the latest on the Libertarian Party in terms of the thinking about whether or not to run a candidate for mayor?
Well, I'm unaware about whether the party is going to be running anyone for mayor. I would definitely encourage it though, because I mean, most of the time the party seems to focus on like just local elections such as councillors. But I think running a libertarian candidate for mayor would definitely be a huge push for the party. But I think in order to actually not only just have a chance, but also have the opportunity to be seen in the spotlight, I think the party has to do a lot more, around the country. Because this would be my one critique of the party, which is the fact that it sort of reserves itself for one major conference every year, and that seems to be it. And I get it that finance is a big problem. It is a small party, so trying to finance alongside the big boys is going to be a very steep hill to try and climb up. But I mean, trying to get a message out, you don't need a lot of funding to do that. I mean, I used to organize direct my own events. I used to fund them myself as well, and I could turn out people between like 100 to 200 people on like one person organizing it, one person funding it, and it was just really simple of just one person or group of people standing on stage with a microphone talking to people. I mean, if one person can organize that and fund it, I don't see why there can't be an entire party, no matter how small it is, organizing lots and lots of events. Because you don't need like a flashing lights and all sorts of like special effects to get a message out there, to try and put yourself out there more to the public, so that way they recognize you more. All you need is a microphone, a stage, and people to speak to. That's all you need to get the ideas out there. So I mean, like, it would be good if the party would run someone for the mayoral candidate, but I think in order for them to, as I said, even get some sort of spotlight, they have to do a lot more. They have to be try and involve themselves. That's why, like, in the regional committee that Sean put me with, I've suggested a few times that maybe the party could endorse and organise protests for freeing Julian Assange, because the majority of libertarians agree that yes, we believe in freedom of the press, we believe in freedom of speech. His only crime, if it could even be called that, was exposing war crimes by governments. And so and as far as I'm aware, there's not been any major party that has officially endorsed and supported the freeing of Julian Assange. So having the Libertarian Party as a whole endorse and organise a protest in favour of him being freed will send a message to the public that we are principled, we have fundamental values that we will stand up for, check us out. And people will turn around and say, wow, these guys do have principles. They're willing to come together as a party to stand up for someone who was wrongfully imprisoned and stand up for other sorts of issues. I wouldn't mind taking a look at these guys. I think that's the sort of thing they need to do if they were to run a candidate to have any sort of spotlight.
Okay, well, we'll keep our eye out for any developments on that. And speaking of some developments that may be taking place shortly, we have some good news about a post-Brexit Japanese trade deal with the UK. Apparently, the UK is only weeks away now from signing a deal, which will not only just carry over the deal which was in place between the EU and Japan, but also it will build on that. Hopefully, we're going to be seeing cheaper Aston Martins in Japan and cheaper PlayStations for the UK. Mike, sounds like it's coming along nicely.
Yeah, absolutely. This is the whole purpose of, or a large part of the purpose of Brexit, is that we can trade more freely outside the EU than we can inside it. I know I've mentioned before on here, I was lucky enough to go out to Japan last year. A fantastic country. You can feel the wealth out there. You can feel great society, really kind of good community feel to it. But there's a lot of stuff out there. There's a lot of good goods and services. Why don't we want to be a part of that? Why don't we want it for cheaper than we can get it today? I can only see good news from this.
Josh, I'm sure that you're in favour of there being no tariffs on any products or services, and complete free trade. But in the absence of that, this must be you must consider this to be good news for the UK.
Yeah, it definitely is good news. Yeah, because obviously Japan is one of the big boys when it comes to technological developments. So having a free trade agreement with them is an amazing thing. I did see recently in the Express that we've recently hit a hurdle because neither side wants to lower tariffs on very sensitive issues such as like agriculture. Apparently the UK won't budge on agriculture unless Japan lowers its tariffs. I can't remember what exactly it was for. But my advice in terms of that would be that the country that imposes the tariffs is the one that ultimately is hurt by the tariffs, and ultimately it's the consumers of the country that get hurt by those tariffs. So, I mean, if my advice to the government when it comes to this would be like, look, if Japan says, can you lower your tariffs on X, just say, sure, we'll do that. We'll lower our tariffs, yeah, because that will ultimately be helping our consumers. So, I mean, but yeah, ultimately this is a great thing, and I would love to see some more development when it comes to the trade deal with America, because I'm still very surprised that, considering America is one of our closest allies, we've never had a free trade deal with them. And I also think with what we're currently going through with the lockdown and coronavirus, I think it would also be a great benefit to the medical field in this country if we were to have a free trade deal with South Korea, because as I mentioned, I think it's about 90% or so of the health industry in South Korea is completely private. And that's part of the reason why they managed to bring out testing kits so early, because all the companies were incentivized to bring them out. And so having a free trade deal with South Korea would be of great benefit if we ever had like another pandemic or an epidemic, because we would have easy access and cheap access to testing kits and highly advanced medical facilities.
Well, we've had a few articles on our website recently about proposals for House of Lords reform. Now, of course, those reforms have yet to take place, any version of that. But there's been some interesting decisions in terms of the dissolution honours, which have recently been announced. Some people we may not be so fond of, such as Ken Clarke and Philip Hammond, have been awarded peerages. Of course, famously, Mr. Bercow has not. But there's been some interesting, very interesting and very good peerages announced. Mike, why don't you take the listeners through a few of those?
Yes, indeed. So it is funny that just going into this, we have written about House of Lords reform on the website, and I wrote an article saying we should have an elected chamber. Seeing today quite a few people on the left, and Robert Preston being one of them, although he might deny he's on the left, complaining about some of the appointments, not least of all Boris's brother and Ian Botham. And you sort of think, well, if you've got a chamber that's full of cronies and appointees, yeah, you're going to get bad appointments. Just don't be shocked. Don't blame the current government for that. There's lots you can blame Boris for, and I certainly do, but can't blame him for there being an unelected second chamber and full of cronies, because that's been going on for years. But some of those cronies, as you say, are fantastic. Kate Hoey, the fabulous Brexiteer Labour MP of Vauxhall, from Northern Ireland, she's been appointed to the second chamber. Giza Stewart, the Labour MP for Birmingham Edgbaston, and obviously from Germany, who's another famous Brexiteer, has been appointed. And the frankly wonderful Claire Fox, the ex-communist Academy of Ideas and Brexit Party MEP, has been appointed. Kind of shocked with Claire Fox that that frankly any government would appoint her, because I think she is probably frankly a bit of a troublemaker, and also amazed, slightly surprised she took the role just because of some of her background, but it's fantastic. Exactly the sort of person you want in the second chamber. Three great women, independently minded, went against the flow of perhaps the groups they were in, and exactly the sort of people you want in a revising chamber holding the government to account.
Yeah, isn't it strange that someone who both yourself and I consider ourselves to be sort of to the right in politics, and yet we're very pleased to see three ladies from the very much the left of politics being appointed to the House of Lords. including, of course, Claire Fox, who, what party was she in years ago? Was it the Revolutionary Communist Party of Great Britain or something like that? I mean, you
Something
can't
like that,
get
yeah.
much more left wing than that. Yeah, incredible stuff, but all very much very well deserved. Josh, what do you think about these appointments, and what's the Libertarian Party's perspective on the second chamber?
Well, I'm going to have to be a stubborn old schmuck and say that I can't stand it whenever there's any new peerages. It's like the thing that that's not really confused me, but I suppose surprised me, was the amount that was given out, especially during the current period where, like, as we've been discussing, how the economy is in tattered, is declining. How we have, the central bank printing limitless amounts of money because then there's no production going on, and yet we decide we're going to offer more peerages to people than we have in the past, which means more taxpayers' money that they desperately need because there's no production going on, going towards a bunch of cronies. I mean, during this current period of time, it would have made a lot more sense to say, like, but okay, if you really, really want to keep the House of Lords, Boris, okay, but during this current period, you should have put the offers off, or at the very least reduced them drastically. The Libertarian position on the House of Lords is really one of reform. My position is, I believe in 2 R's. You either reform it or you remove it. Either make it a democratically elected body, which is made up of past experienced MPs that the people vote for, because they believe that they have merited the position. And if that's not possible, then you say, okay, then just remove it, because in its current form is really a complete waste of taxpayers' money, in addition to the ridiculous expenses that they gather for themselves. I mean, all that money for the expenses, if we had no House of Lords, could have gone back to the taxpayers in some form of a return tax during the current lockdown, and made it much easier for people to survive during this period. So really overall, even if someone like, say, Jacob Rees-Mogg, who I'm a big supporter of, I quite like him. He's probably one of the very few Conservatives, or MPs that I like. Even if he got a peerage, I would still say, yeah, I like him, but is still against it.
So, Josh, thank you ever so much again for joining us today. You've written a number of times for our website, and thanks for that. And I'll say to everyone listening, if you've got an opinion, you've got something you want to say, drop us a line. We'd love to publish you. So, Josh, we've obviously mentioned about your involvement in the Libertarian Party and being a libertarian. So, firstly, what led you to become a libertarian?
Well, that's a very long story. Because my first experience with anything related to libertarianism was just watching a lecture on Levian philosophy, where it was only just like a offhand remark mentioned that a lot of people who subscribe to the Levian philosophy tend to subscribe to libertarianism. And after I heard that, I started to go over it a bit and realized there's actually like a lot of similarities, because the Levian philosophy and libertarianism believe in individual responsibility, individual sovereignty. I was never completely a libertarian, though, because I think it was 2014. I was actually a Labour supporter. Not the proudest moment in my life, I must admit. But even then, I still, especially because I had inclinations towards libertarianism, because I believed in a lot more choice of people. I remember meeting up with the local councillor for my borough, and saying to him that, at the time I said, yeah, I support the idea of free university for students, but at the same time I was saying, but it shouldn't be for every student. Maybe make it some sort of incentive, like if they get a distinction in college, then they get to go to university for free to incentivize working harder. So I was never, completely on board with the Labour platform of, free education and, free puppies, free unicorns, and everything else like that. But the thing that really led me towards deciding, yes, I absolutely agree with the libertarian position, was watching a conference video with one of the libertarian members called Will Taylor, where he was talking about his journey from being a socialist to becoming a libertarian, and how to convert left-wing friends. And after watching it, I thought, especially when he was talking about the role of taxation, how it is stealing the fruits of our labor from each individual person, I thought, this actually makes a lot of sense. Because before that, to me, it was sort of just like a black and white. It's either, left wing or right wing sort of viewpoint. But after watching a few more conferences and learning about the political philosophy more, I sort of decided this actually makes a lot of sense. Individual freedom, individual responsibility, economic freedom. If you provide lots and lots of safety nets for people, there's no risk for people. Then there's not going to be, they're not going to learn how to sort of especially support themselves. And we need that risk in order to assess what the best decisions are for ourselves. And so that was really that's really what made me a libertarian. It was sort of my own philosophy that I subscribed to before libertarianism, and exposing myself to the ideas of the party and the philosophy itself.
Thank you for that. And it's interesting you mentioned the journey from supporting Labour but still believing in a lot of freedom. There was once upon a time that actually a lot of the Labour Party, although economically collectivists, were kind of personally much more in favour of liberty. And we spoke about a few of those people getting peerages, but of course not anymore. Well, that leads us on to, since you've been involved in libertarianism, you're writing a book on the social science of the market. Can you just maybe tell us a little bit about that book and what's led you to write it?
So the idea behind the social science of the market is large numbers of people believe that the economy and society are sort of abstracts and that they're separate from each other, when in fact economics is the lifeblood of any society. So the goal of the book really is to look at the social interactions that we have in a market economy, what they mean, and what signals that we are sending to each other. So, when consumers buy particular goods, it's because they value these goods and they're sharing value with each other. So it really goes into I suppose you could say, the psychology of a market economy, the social interaction aspects of market economy, while also delving into a few fallacies which I've written about for the Korean constitutionalists, so such as like a price gouging, price controls, monopolies, and central banks. So the goal of the book really is to show people that the economy is not something separate from society, which actually makes me think that I should probably try and write it a bit faster, because that's sort of the mindset that a lot of people have during this current lockdown, like of people saying, oh, screw your economy, lives are at stake. When in fact, well, actually, if we tank the economy, there will be many more lives that will be at stake, and for a much longer period of time, because poverty is the natural state of man. And if we allow the economy to tank and continue to tank because we want to save people in the short run, we're going to see that there's a lot more people that die in the long run, because they will not be able to provide for themselves. There won't be any production, there won't be any investment. And so it will go back to the period before, at a most drastic level, it would go back to the period before Adam Smith's The Wealth of Nations book came out, where economic growth was sort of flat, and you were either the aristocrats or you were poor and dying. And so really, the book is about trying to explain to people that, look, the economy is not separate. The economy and society are linked together, and we need to actually start recognizing that they are one and the same.
Yeah, absolutely. That is something, again, it's a lack of education and a lack of understanding from a lot of people there. But you've spoken recently about the free market and environmentalism. Just wondering, how do you think we can use the market to improve the environment?
Okay, so the way you can use the market to try and help the environment is, I suppose, the first example to really get an idea about what we're talking about is using the example of HS2. HS2 is a perfect example of the disrespect of property rights and the role of eminent domain. And eminent domain is one of the most ridiculous aspects of any government and any society, where if a government has a project that is for the public good, it can seize that property, it can seize the land in order to pursue its project, which is supposedly for the public good, which is a complete disrespect to property rights. And the way that we can actually help the environment with property rights is by making it so that we privatize forests, for example. With most forests, we suffer with what's known as the tragedy of the commons, where either everyone owns something or no one owns something, so there's no incentive to preserve it. There's no opportunity cost, and we've attempted to try and tackle this by saying, okay, well, if you're say cutting down trees, then you can only cut down X amount. Well, the problem is though, because there's still no one that owns it, all the companies just say, okay, well, I'll just take the maximum amount then. And so there's no actual opportunity cost. There's no assessment about, how much this is valued. Whereas if we were to say privatize the forest, let's say make it so that it is owned by either a company that makes paper products or just owned by an estate, they would charge for cutting down trees based on the supply and demand. And in addition to this would make it so that they are more incentivized to plant more trees, make it so that they are of a higher quality, make it so that they can live for much longer, and potentially even decide, okay, well, because I've made such a large profit, I'm going to cordon off a part of the forest that I own, and I'm going to make that a animal sanctuary. So anyone that wants to purchase trees that I've grown, sure, you can purchase these trees, but you're not touching the animal sanctuary that I formed. And to try and make a profit off of that, I'm going to decide to open it up to the public for public viewing, walking around and seeing the animals, which will ensure that I can better facilitate to the needs of the animals by providing them with veterinary supplies, providing them food. And all of that can create a ripple effect of, especially in, say, veterinary work, where if you, say, have someone that owns a forest and a portion of it is cordoned off for animal sanctuary purposes, that then incentivize vets to then begin innovating and finding new ways of treating animals, which could ripple onto drugs and medicines that could potentially help humans as well. And so there's this whole ripple effect where if you just make it so that you have private property in the form of land and forests, you can have a whole ripple effect that can greatly improve the lives of everyone. The other area of the free market can actually help environmentalism is during, I think it was the mid or early 19th century, might be an 18th century, when coal factories were very, very prominent, you would have cases where if a company was using very cheap coal and it damaged someone else's property, let's say it was like a dust particles, the owner of that property then could go to the courts and say, I'd like an injunction against this business because they're damaging my property. And most of the time, this would actually favor the person whose property had been damaged. And so this would actually incentivize the companies to say, well, if I keep using this cheap coal, I'm going to have to keep paying the people that own property I'm damaging. Whereas if I spend a little bit more on more expensive coal, I'll have less people nagging me about damaging their property. And this went on for a while, and it sort of stopped. I think it was around the late 19th century. I'm not too sure. When the courts decided that they were no longer going to favor property rights and decided that screw your property rights because this factory is producing for the public good. And the problem with that is if it then becomes the norm where this factory is for the public good. Well, if you're a environmentally friendly business and you want to try and find ways to not pollute as much, you're at a financial disadvantage because every other company is not incentivized to be environmentally friendly because they are supposedly part of the public good. And so really, it's the best way to try and help the environment would be to privatize forests, privatize parks as well, because there's a really great park in I think it's Slough called Black Park. It's a privately owned park. It charges for entry, and it is probably one of the cleanest parks I've ever seen. They even have, it's very similar to what I was saying, they actually have areas that are cornered off for animals to try and preserve them. I think last time I checked, there was actually quite a few red squirrels, which are quite endangered species that are in the area. And as I said, this is actually a perfect example about what I was saying about private forests. We have a private park that has areas cornered off from the public that is to preserve the life of animals that are endangered, while also making a profit and having a very clean environment. So yeah, privatize the forests and actually show some respect for property rights by making it so that people can actually bring injunctions towards companies that damage their property. And another way to do it, the least that could be done in terms of say government projects would be to make it so that, okay, the governments have to form contracts with communities saying what they can do, what they're not allowed to do, and paying fines if they break their contracts or if they damage private property. And so this will incentivize, at the very least, it will incentivize governments to respect private property and to respect the contracts they make with communities. And ultimately, if that is brought into the private sphere, then that will make it so that private companies that want to try and spread their business out, say like spread their factory out or spread their airport out, they'll have to get consent from the local communities who were there, if they were there first, and form contracts with them based on what they're allowed to do, what they're not allowed to do, and pay any fines if they break the contract.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, so something you wrote about us for was price gouging. Now, we saw queues for toilet roll running into the COVID crisis. So why do you think Tesco, Sainsbury's and the other shops should have been able to, and maybe should have charged us £10 for a roll of toilet paper?
Okay, so first of all, price gouging, it's not technically an economic term, because price gouging is simply when the price for a certain consumer good, like say toilet roll, increases beyond what is considered a fair amount. And this is often seen as taking advantage of a bad situation, or a company being greedy, when in fact if the company was just being greedy, why didn't they just suddenly decide to increase prices at a much earlier date? It was because the market conditions were as such where it wouldn't have been possible for them to increase prices, and they would have actually lost a lot of money. The reason that the price increases happened is because market conditions have changed. Consumer demand and consumer value for a particular good has increased, and so that has created, and the demand for it has gone beyond the supply, and so a new equilibrium has been established where this good is now valued at a higher rate. And there are actually great benefits to this, especially during a crisis. The benefits to it in a crisis is the fact that if the prices are allowed to reflect consumer demand, then you won't get situations like we had, where you had thousands of people buying hundreds and hundreds of toilet rolls and having nearly a shortage in toilet rolls, which would have been an interesting development in the UK to have a shortage of toilet rolls. But allowing the price to increase and actually reflect consumer value will then send signals to other producers and other innovators and investors that, okay, there is a higher demand in this area, so we're now incentivized to produce more. And so that way the supply can actually reflect the demand. Because the problem with having a price control is it skews the signals that consumers and producers send to each other. Very similar to what we did with, say, the housing, which is why we're still currently in a housing crisis, where we tried to have rent controls. And these are still a form of price control, and these controls skew the signals that consumers and producers were sending to each other, and sending a false signal to consumers that there was a higher supply than what there actually is, which made it so that producers not only could not make a profit, they couldn't make their money back. So it disincentivized further production. And also made it so that landlords were less incentivized to offer their property up for rent to people looking for a place to live. And this is the damage that any form of price control can do, because, as I said, it skews the signals. It gives a false illusion to how much is actually in supply. Very similar to when, say, central banks increase the credit and decrease the interest rates. It's sending a false signal about how much money is actually in the banks. And it produces long-term problems for both consumers and producers in the long run by making it so that there is very little incentive to provide more, which makes it so that the living standards of people drop over time. And it makes it so that it's very hard to really come back from that. So really, like the issue isn't really so there's not really much. There's not an issue with the price gouging, because, as I said, it's just a reflection of the market conditions of what the value of these goods are worth. And also, it's ultimately not the producer that decides the price of the economic good. It's ultimately the decision of the consumer based on the consumer's actions and what consumer goods they decide to purchase and in what quantities. So ultimately, it is the consumer. So I mean, like, I don't believe in pointing fingers, but I mean, if we were to point fingers at any one particular group, it would be, I suppose you could say, it was the consumer's own fault that the price increased. But I mean, again, I don't believe in pointing fingers, because I think allowing prices to increase when the demand warrants it makes it so that we send signals that, you know, we want more of this. So producers and investors will be more incentivized to bring this to the market, so that way the living standards of people can increase in the long run.
Thank you. Thanks for that. That's really interesting. And whilst no one wants to pay more, you can understand maybe sometimes it's the right thing in the short term. So obviously, over this period of COVID as well, we've seen the schools closed for most of the year so far. Hopefully they'll be back in September. Now, you wrote to us about a private market in education a little while back. Briefly, maybe tell us about how that would work and what you might see as the main benefits from it.
Okay, so the way a private education system would work would be that, first of all the schools would be in competition with each other, because they'd want to try and have more students. And the additional way it would work would be parents would ultimately be paying for the value of their child's education. And this could come in a form, or this could come in many different forms. You could have, I've suggested many times that it could come in the form of, say, paper package systems, where you pay for the classes that you think are going to be valuable to your child's development. So, for example, not every child is going to benefit from learning geography or learning art. So having a private education system will make it so that if it is completely private and under a free market, parents could decide, okay, well, Maths and English are mandatory because that is what you need to have any sort of basic job. I don't think my child is going to benefit from learning art, but I definitely would like them to learn, say, science, or I'd like them to learn geography. So parents will be able to decide what sort of educational packages they want to have for their child. And the benefit of this is the fact that under the current system, education is very standardized and regimented, and it's entirely based on what the government wants children to learn, which makes it very, very susceptible to propaganda, and also making it so that parents ultimately in the current system, don't have much of a choice when it comes to their child's education. In a private free market, for example, if you decide, I wanted to take my child, say, on a holiday, I'm paying for it, so I get to decide, when they're going to be in class. That's not possible in the current system, where it is mandatory, and it doesn't matter what reason you have, whether it's deemed valid or not. you can actually be prosecuted if you don't bring your child into school for a certain period of time. So the benefit is a lot more choice for parents, a lot more affordability as well, and ultimately we'd see the standards for education increase as well. And we could even potentially, so like, for example, if you're a parent that is very concerned about, say, bullying in schools, you would actually see schools be a lot more strict when it came to bullying, because if children were being constantly bullied at a private school, the parents could simply pull their children out and the school would cease to receive the money from the consumer. So it would be financially incentivized to be strict on bullying and to provide a high quality education, because ultimately it's not getting its money from the government, it's getting its money from the consumer. So it has to try and incentivize people by providing the packages and quality education at a valued price.
Thank you. That's really interesting. It's something we don't hear enough about, perhaps, in this country. So lastly, all good libertarians have a problem with central banks. You're no exception. Will cryptocurrency save us all from fiat currency quantitative easing?
Absolutely, yeah. It will definitely save us from quantitative easing, because that's it's simply another form of inflation. And the great benefit of it, well, there's many great benefits to cryptocurrency, but one of them is the fact that, like the gold standard, there is a set amount. So there's a set amount of each cryptocurrency. Once a cryptocurrency, let's say Bitcoin, has reached its maximum amount, no more can be created, which makes it scarce. And all money, money has to have certain qualities in order to qualify as a money. And one of the most important ones is scarcity. If a money can be created with ease, without cost, and can be limitless, then it loses its value and it loses one of the core qualities of it being classified as a money. So it makes it so that people ultimately have a lot more control over how much the banks can and the governments can have control over the money supply. The other benefit to it, which I didn't mention in the article, but I wouldn't mind mentioning it here, is the fact that we hear a lot of the time that cryptocurrency, you can still get taxed on it. That's true and not true at the same time. If you purchase cryptocurrency and then it suddenly increases in value, and then you sell your cryptocurrency, then you, for government money, then you can face capital gains tax. But if you decide that you are only going to trade in cryptocurrency, you're only going to accept cryptocurrency for your services, you don't pay any taxes. And so there was quite a lot of concern going around about whether we could ever become a cashless society and what that would mean. And thinking about it, and honestly, I think if we ever did become, say, a cashless society, it could potentially be, it could potentially create a massive blowback to the government and could bite them. It could bite them back very, very hard. Because if we turned into a cashless society and people didn't trust the old institutions of the banks, the central banks, the governments, then they could decide, okay, well, we're all going to decide that we're just going to trade in cryptocurrency. I'm only going to accept cryptocurrency for the services of my labor. I'm only going to accept cryptocurrency for the capital that I purchase. And so you make it so that's, okay, yeah, we've turned into a cashless society, but because everyone is now trading cryptocurrency, the government has no way of getting its taxes. And that's because of the mechanism of the blockchain, where there's the public key, which you use to send and receive money from other participating parties. And there's the private key, which is linked to your account and the blockchain. And each individual crypto wallet has a private key. So the only way for a government to get taxed in a crypto society would be to send millions of requests to every single person that is holding crypto that they don't have to agree to. They can decide to say deny, and the government cannot do a thing about it. So it is completely private money. It is scarce money, which allows it to become more valuable over time. If production increases beyond the money supply, that will allow for growth deflation, which is when production is increasing and we're seeing prices drop because the money is becoming a lot more scarce than the production that is going on in the country. And ultimately, it could, the ideal benefit is the fact that it would rid us of taxes.
No, brilliant. Thank you. Well, thank you so much for your time there and for speaking to us.
Yes, thanks for that, Josh. Some very interesting perspectives there. Well, as I mentioned before, Josh has written for the website quite a few times now. If you'd like to write for the website or have any other stories you'd like us to cover, then please do contact us. You can do so via the Twitter @CroydonConst, via our Facebook page, via our website, croydonconstitutionalists.uk, or via email, croydonconstitutionalists@gmail.com. Well, do please subscribe to the podcast and the pubcast and our YouTube channel. Please do like and share the podcast, and please do leave a review. We always appreciate the feedback, and it helps others to find the podcast. Well, thanks again, Josh, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
And finally, thank you to everybody for listening. Until next time, it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from me.
Stay safe, everybody.